Hi, welcome back to Ribbon Candy Hooking. I'm Deanna. Today I'm going to be talking about using sweaters, recycling sweaters for your rug hooking projects. So I have been spending a lot of time cutting up old sweaters, sweaters that I have taken from the clutches of moths and garbage bags that were intended for charity drops, charity stores, rummage sales, things like that. We are hooking with knits a lot right now in my group, and there's been a lot of conversation about what works well and how to hack up a sweater in a way that you maximize it for your hooking project. So let's talk about that together. Taking a sweater, washing it, drying it, and cutting it is not obviously a science, but there are a few things to know that will help you know whether you're on the right track or whether you are beating a dead horse. Not everything that you think is going to hook well is going to hook well, and that's just life. That goes the same for wool strips. But you can make some choices that are better than others, especially if you're spending money in any store. So I'm going to show you a few of the things that work and a few of the things that haven't worked as well. So, at the end of the day, you're going to end up, when you have a little collection of things going, with a big pile of stuff that looks like this, part of a sleeve cap or something that you've hacked off. Everything on this table is something, except for the things I literally just brought in, is something that I've already pushed through the wash at least once. So I'm taking things from shops or wherever I can find them that are either 100% wool, and someone said, is lamb's wool okay? Definitely okay. Any kind of wool is okay. Merino is okay. A lot of wools come in different weights, so we'll talk about that in a second. They're all okay. Some will come out really mushy cushy, others will come out thin but still be fine for hooking. So there's a lot to experiment with. Another thing that comes out really well is Angora. I've cut up a couple of Angora sweaters this weekend, but I've used them all for kits. But you'll have to trust me, Angora will blend, even with a little synthetic in it, the real 1950s kind that feels all furry and soft, right through the wash, the dryer, cut it up, and it could not have looked any better in terms of hooking and managing. So that works well too. But if you are just going for a plain wool sweater, something like this, usually your garment tag with care and information is on the inside. Sometimes it's not there at all because it's already gone. Occasionally it's on the neck. So this is a dry clean only, 100% lamb's wool. This has already gone through the washer. So again, I'm putting things into the washer on warm or hot, and then I'm putting them into the dryer on like high heat. And sometimes they come out and they are still too thin and don't feel like they've done enough felting with the heat and the washing process. So then I put them in a second time. And there's a couple things I've put in a third time. So you get what you get and you don't get upset. But let's see what's working the best. Something this weight, 100% lamb's wool, is working great. And what you're going to do when you find a piece that works is you're going to cut it up in a strategic way. I already started going to town on this one with some pumpkins in one of the kits. But if you are a person who doesn't sew and hasn't sewn or knit or crochet and you have no knowledge at all of clothing construction, it's not gonna be any sort of a hindrance to you. You're gonna deconstruct a garment right along the lines that you would expect to, right at the seams. The obvious invisible seams is where you're gonna start hacking into it. So you hack it in at the seams, right at the armholes. Don't go across nice fresh areas where you have possible strips to use. Just cut it up at the seams. And when you've got pieces that you think you can use, you are then, I'm going to put this close up to you, you're then looking at it in terms of, the question keeps coming up, why doesn't it unravel? Well, it's not gonna unravel because as it was stitched together, this is obviously machine stitched together, it was done at the end or at the top or whatever, but it was stitched in one piece. And if you were to find that one piece and pull it, just like a Victorian cat postcard, it would come unraveling. But it's not going to come unraveling just because I undid the end of it. It's not going to want to do that. So at this point, I've got a raw seam that I just cut, and I want to show you how easy this is to deal with. Now there's two things I can do here. I'm putting this through my Bliss. I normally use my Sizzix cutter, but I don't want to dull the blades on it because you can't sharpen them as far as I know. They're embedded in cushions. So let me see what's going on here. I might have to tighten them up a bit. But he's making good. I'm going to cut it so we don't go too, oops, just ripped one off, so we don't go too far. So let me just show you what it looks like coming out. You're going to get little noodles like this, like all noodles, and this is going to work out well, right? They want to pull this way, but they're not going to unravel. They're not going to unravel at all. I'm pulling pretty hard. You know, that's going to make a loop real well. I'll show you just how well. When you get this piece, for example, into your backing, I've got a regular primitive hook, meaning it's a large hook. It's the same hook I use for everything. Didn't do anything different this time. Pulling it through. It's not a huge piece, but you see it makes a nice fat, you know, plump looking loop. So that is going to work great. Now, if I were to look at the same garment and I'm looking at the ribbed bottom, this could go differently for me, right? Because this has this, the way that this has been knitted at the hem, this is a different knit than the body of it, right? So this is a nice flat, even knit. This has got a pattern and a texture to it. So this can go either way, and I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to run it through right at the hem. It's obviously when you do something like this to a hem, it's going to have more stretch, and that's not always a good thing. It really depends on the sweater. Now this sweater has a lot of integrity, so the question is, lamb's wool good? Lamb's wool is great. This has a ton of integrity, but of course it's going to stretch more than your regular sweater would, because of course at the hem, that's what goes over your hips, and it's meant to hug and cling a bit more. This is still going to hook really well. I'll show you. It's going to give you a textured look. You're not going to lose the texture or the pattern of the ribbing just because it's being hooked. It looks a bit messier because it has that texture, but you could be going for any look. You might just be going for color and you really don't care. So you see that hooks real well too. So that's fine too. So this lamb's wool sweater, I would just go about cutting it at all of the seams and cutting nice flat pieces. These are just like kitchen scissors. Use any scissors that work. Just keep cutting at all the seams until I have lots of flat pieces that I can use. I know with this one, I'm going to be able to cut it sideways, front ways. Let me show you, just for fun. Let me cut off the ribbing and show you what this looks like when you cut it sideways, because so far I cut it down the seam where I initially cut it, and then I cut the ribbing, and I showed you the ribbing cut off and hooked. But let's see the bottom part right on top of the ribbing going horizontally across rather than top to bottom. This is probably going to bring up the question in your head, what about diagonal? And we're going to get there in a minute. Because you don't, you know, these sweaters are not cheap. You don't want to waste anything, right? This is like killing something. You want to use every possible part of it. We've killed it now, putting it through the wash. So this is also going to be nice and stretchy. It wants to, if you can see that, it doesn't have as much integrity. I'm pulling it, you know, fairly hard. It doesn't have as much integrity as the strips that were cut top to bottom, like this one. This one has a bit more integrity. This is got a bit chopped up. Well, this got really chopped up in the machine. But top to bottom is a bit more stretchy. This one went like this on the side of the sweater, and this one's at the hem of the sweater, and it's just a little bit less integrity. But I bet you it's still going to hook just fine. You know, you want to be careful, and you have to remind yourself in terms of color placement and what you choose to do when you are hooking sweater material. It is a little bit more fragile, where every time you pull up a loop, you're pulling up a lot of knitted loops, right? They are machine knitted and they are fairly secure, but they are still a ton of loops within a loop. So you can see that even though this is a lot more fragile, it's still hooking just the same. So I've got right there in this little trio, top to bottom vertical cut, I've got a sideways cut, so a horizontal, and I've got a cut right through the ribbing, and all three of them work fine. So let's just for fun look at doing something diagonal. So if I were to cut this sweater here, I'm just going to cut a little piece off because I don't want to waste too much. It's too precious. If I were to cut it diagonally, now let's run it through and see what happens. I'm making the point about diagonals because you know when you do take every piece of it off, you are going to get a lot of sleeve caps and parts of the sweater that are on the diagonal, or rather bias. and you are going to want to use them, and can you use them will be the question. So here comes the answer. This is a very, very diagonal cut. I'm pulling up a little bit higher so you can see it closer up. And again, it's absolutely no problem. So this is the diagonal I just did. This is the horizontal, this is the ribbing, and this is the top to bottom. They all hook great. If you have this sweater and you cut it up, you have got a lot of material to use, and it's all going to hook great. There's not going to be any issues. So moving on, when you find your garment, you're cutting it at the seams, you're taking off necklines, things like that. Let me find a good example of that. This is a good example of that. This kind of a sweater, a crew neck. This is an express sweater. It is 100% wool, but let's see if there's any more information than that. 100% lamb's wool again. So again, I'm going to just be taking the scissors, bring you back here, cutting along the seams again. You can see this one has a very heavily ribbed bottom. This is obviously a man's sweater or a unisex sweater. And I'm going to be doing the same thing. And again, I can either cut top to bottom, I can cut the ribbing again, I can cut side to side. You know, every sweater is going to handle differently. Even though it's the same content, could be a slightly different knit. Machines can knit hundreds, if not thousands, of sort of configurations, knits. And as a result, you can get something slightly different. Let's, for fun, just cut the side of this one and see if we get the same nice, clean, stretchy pieces to use. So here we go. I'm pulling that quite hard. Again, it doesn't look like it has a ton of integrity. And, you know, I'm not doing this to do like some kind of a weird infomercial effect, because plenty of the stuff I've hooked using sweaters so far has just crumbled or fallen apart in my hands. But most things you can, once in a while something breaks, you have to just keep going, pick it up and use the rest of the end like an earthworm, right? Make it into two lives instead of one. So that hooked fine. That's not a problem either. But they can break, and when they do break, just do what you can, save the pieces you can, keep going with the pieces you can. Doubling up is sometimes a thing if it's super thin. Just keep going and see what you can get. But with a sweater like this, you're going to need to cut the neck off. So you're going to want to cut under the seams. You're not going to want to ruin your scissors and cut right on the seams, but I'm cutting, let's see, right below the seam. I'm not going to be able to use this neck, this collar at all for hooking anyway, because number one, it's never going to go through my backing. It's never going to go through the bliss. I'm going to break the machine if I try. It's just too thick. It might be if I was a real diehard and I wanted to save this neckline, I could cut it like here, under here, right? If you really want to save it, you really need a little bit more. I could cut it right along the edge here, all the way. Again, if you really need the material and you're right at the end, and unfold it and get away from the seams, but run the good part through the bliss, right? So not so much the seams. You don't want to test your machine by keep running heavy things on purpose through the seams, but you could unfold it and you've got another little more than an inch all the way around the neckline. If you really need it, it's there. It's like the legs on the lobster, right? But I otherwise detached it just with my scissors just now from the neckline, because this is all usable. And yeah, this is on a bit of an angle, but we already know that that's not going to be a problem. You can hook something that's been cut diagonally. You're going to have a little bit more trouble with things like cable knits like this. This is washed same way, but you know, it gets a little more felty. Some things get more felty and thick than others. It's not a big deal, but cable knits can be a bit funny. So let me show you. Cable knits, because just the name of it is going to give you some clues. It's a different kind of a knit. It's a cable that runs alongside a straight panel and alternates. So the cable knit part is going to be, if you can see this, have less integrity, right? Because it's got highs and lows and dips. So something like this can break, right? And if it does, just use this piece and use this piece and get on with it. Not every piece is going to break. Some of them are a little bit thicker and they make better work of it, but some pieces will break. With a cable knit, when I can, I try to cut down. I try to cut with the pattern, with the striping. You've got these bands that come down like the braids or the scrolls. I try to come down with it. It's easier. When you cut across a pattern that has this high relief, this high texture, you're just sort of asking for trouble. It's not going to be a do or die. You're going to be able to use the material one way or another. But when you cut across, you are almost accentuating its weaknesses, which are on both sides of the scroll every time you hit the scroll. So why not just cut the sides and get nice, long, strong pieces? Weirdly, the scrolls, the patterned piece that has this kind of braid in it that's the most fragile, it's number one, still not fragile. And number two, it's stronger north to south than it is east to west. It's stronger this way. So it's just a tip to cut it this way, but if you accidentally cut the whole sweater this way, you're still going to use it. It's just going to break a little bit more. It's not going to be the end of the world. So then we've got stuff like this. This is the bottom of a Fair Isle. Now this has been, normally things that are thready on the bottom don't work well. There's too many loose threads on the bottom. This has been washed within an inch of its life. So it could be that this works better. Let's see. I have not had hardly any success with Fair Isles. Now look how jagged this is. I'm not going to, like, as if it were fabric or a pattern or even wool, I'm not going to square it out. I'm just going to cut it like this because we know it's going to work whether it's diagonal, vertical, or horizontal. It's not going to make any difference. So if I go on a curve, like you would on armholes and things like that, it's still going to work. So let's see. This Fair Isle is so well washed and felty at this point. I think it's going to hook really, yeah, it's going to hook great. They can fall apart, Fair Isles. I don't recommend buying them, especially if you're spending money on them, if they're not already moth-eaten and in the attic. It can go either way. I've had other Fair Isles that just don't work. So I don't know what's different about this one because it's 100% wool, just like mine were, but it's obviously the way that the machine has knitted it. This works great. There are lots of different kinds of knits. And despite having a degree in clothing construction, I don't know them all off the top of my head. But I do know when you see something and it's got threads falling all over the place on the back, it's not going to work. This is very tight and the design is almost woven into the material. This works great. That's not going to be a problem. But anything with pattern or color changes has potential to be a problem. Now, this just has potential. If it's cheap, give it a shot. This is a mix that I got. This is, I think, mostly acrylic, or it could be all synthetics. And this is not going to hook well. So I'm going to show you, as much as I love this heathery pink, I'm going to show you, this has been through the wash multiple times. And by the way, if you put stuff through the wash and it's stuff you spent money on, things that are wool or things that are blends, and you've already done a little bit of cutting or cut the sleeves and you've got some, I'm not talking about strips, but if you've got some pieces, arms, like strips, large strips that you've hacked off of it, and you're like, oh, I should have washed it one more time. That would have maybe made the difference between being able to use it or not. Just take your pieces, put them in a pair of pantyhose, tie them up so they can't escape, and put them through the wash one more time. Give them one more chance to perform before you completely throw stuff out in a fury. So I'm going to show you something that isn't going to work. This is the synthetic. And I even hate to do this. I'm going to cut it here because you can hear it grinding away. I'm going to pull it out here. It's going to kill the machine. You can hear it grinding away. So number one, when you hear your machine making that grinding noise like it's chewing on metal, that's not going to be good. It makes a piece that looks similar to other pieces, but it doesn't have much integrity at all. And you know, I've got an 8 wheel on this right now. I'm going to try to hook it. And if I force it, square peg, circle hole, if I force it, it's going to work. I do not want you to cut it on your cutters, though. You're going to dull your blade and then you're going to have an issue with blades. You know, blades are not cheap. It's going to come out a little bit uneven because there's hardly any integrity. I know you're saying to yourself, no big deal. It looks all right. It looks all right. It's okay for a background. But you really, if you're determined to use a sweater, if it's a special sweater or something, you're determined to use it, don't cut it, obviously. Go top to bottom. Don't go across ribbing like this. It won't take it. It won't take it if you go horizontal with something like this. It barely puts up with it when you do something top to bottom. So instead, I'm going to show you an example of cutting with my scissors a much larger strip. So this is obviously much larger than an 8. That's like, you know, a 1/2 inch strip. So let's see if I can hook with this. Since you can't and you shouldn't use your cutter for it, you might as well see what it looks like. See, it's much thicker. So then you're thinking and planning ahead for using something that is this thickness. But when you do, and you don't mind cutting it, you know, old time style, it does work out, right? It's nice and fat and fluffy and puffy and full. It will work out. So you don't have to cry yourself to sleep. You can use the pink heathery sweater. You didn't wash it and start cutting at it for nothing. It can be used. It's just going to be a little bit more labor intensive, but you might as well use it, right? So then we've got a few other things. I don't want to make this too long. There are things like this sweater. This is like a J. Crew sweater. It's 100% merino wool. So merino wool can be thick or thin, but you often see it thin. You know, it's been popular quite thin for a long time for like summer evenings and through every other season. It's a trans-seasonal material. So the thinner one will remain thin no matter how many times you wash it. So I'm just going to cut a little bit off the bottom. The thing with these merino sweaters is because they've been so popular lately in fashion, J. Crew, Gap, companies like this, like the higher end, you know, medium end chains, women's chains, they've been doing merino for years, and they do it in amazing colors, and it takes the color well. The wool takes the color well. So, you know, it is very tempting to buy tons of them. Hold that thought. It is tempting to buy tons of them, and maybe you should. It is fun to use them, and you get, again, the most classic colors, the brightest, most yummy. But they will never plump out the way that, for example, lamb's wool will. You'll never get that heavy felty look with merino, with the thin merino. But you will be able to use it for sure. So I'm out of breath just walking through the basement. So I'm going to cut a little bit up here. I'm going to cut away from the ribbing and just put it through the machine. Now again, I've got an 8 wheel on my Bliss right now. You could be cutting this by hand too. No grinding teeth, so we know this is 100% even if we didn't have the tag on it. So it comes out pretty strong. Pretty strong. It's a good feel. It doesn't feel like it's going to disintegrate in my hands. It's not going to turn to atoms. But let's look at it hook. You know it's going to be fine because it's wool. And again, if it's not fine or if it's a little thin, and you love the color and you mean to use it, just cut it with your scissors, and you will be home free. It's a lot of sweater to use. Also consider the style of the sweater you're using. That hooks beautifully. That's the merino. That hooks really well for a thin sweater. That's not going to be a problem at all. You know, be careful planning your colors and stuff. Sweaters can be so different in weight. If you get one that's like a thick lamb's wool to begin with versus a really thin summer merino, you know the merino is not going to beef out to the same thickness. So you're going to have a sort of differences in height and fullness as you go. Make sure that that's okay for you. When you're hooking with sweaters, it's going to be apples and oranges and pears. It's not going to be apples to apples ever. Every sweater that you cut will perform differently. So be sure that you are looking forward to that sort of diversity and variety, because that will be the beauty of using this as a medium instead of just door wool, something different. So that's something to think about. And I'm going to show you one more thing, but I also just want to remind you not only just to wash your sweaters to keep them clean, but make sure, like right now I am cutting on my dining room table, make sure that you have everything clean around you while you're cutting. It's very tempting for me to eat a giant bag of Doritos while I'm doing this time-consuming business of cutting sweaters, but you really have to keep everything clean, because you need to remember that moths typically do not go after clean wool. They only go after dirty stuff with food that they go for. They won't go after stuff that's clean. So make sure you keep your wool clean. Make sure your surfaces are clean when you're working. Otherwise, you're going to attract moths and it's going to be all for naught. Don't forget about other things like scarves. I had a great scarf here that's been through the wash. This is, again, a knit that's been felted. And this is going to be great to hook with. It's like super, super beefy. And a surprising one, a dark horse, these mohair scarves, right? These are knits. They're done like on a loom. They're done usually in Scotland and Ireland. Familiar looking. These are these scarves that you buy when you're on vacation from places like Donegal Looms, and this one is Glen Cove. They're very vintage, and they look so luminescent and beautiful, and you end up buying them as souvenirs, and you realize sooner rather than later that there's no way you can put them anywhere near your body because they are the most itchy thing on earth. Even when they're across the room, they're hurting you by itching you just by looking at them. So these are a good thing. I washed these 2 or 3 times and they hook really well. This is one of the strands from the blue guy. It looks, it is a little bit fragile, so I'm not going to pull it super hard, but you see how fluffy, puffy, and airy and shiny that is. It has a glow that you can't get without mohair. And even though it's a little fragile and once in a while they will rip, most of the time they won't. Let me show you. I'm going to squeeze him in here. You can see what he looks like next to someone else, because these scarves, when you get them, you can get them as blankets or scarves, sometimes as garments or coats. It's a big piece of material. It's a lot of material. And once you get it washed and it's all matted together, because it's normally, these Scottish and Irish wools are very open weave. You don't want that. You want it to be really well washed, so it's all felted to itself, very tight. And then you want to start cutting it. Just cut a little bit when you start doing something with mohair, because you want to be sure that you're there. If you're not there, you've got to put it through the wash one more time and make sure that you're there then. Then take another little piece off and just see. So this is this whole piece I just did right here. And bring it back down here. You can see it looks super soft. It's very, very, very full and mushy. And it's going to hook beautifully. And as you can imagine, that was just a plain blue piece from off the mohair. But, these mohair scarves are plaid, and they are super colorful, super shiny with a jewel-like glow to them. They hook beautifully. So don't forget about those. Don't forget about wool socks. Don't forget about wool anything. Any knit that you can think of. Put it through the wash, see how it goes, especially if it's damaged. Make sure it's clean when you take it out and that it stays clean. So rules of thumb, when you have something that's a blend, try it, wash it, dry it, see what it feels like in terms of integrity. Then cut a little piece off. Don't take the hem, the ribbed hem as an example, because it's not a good example. The hem can go either way. Cut the hem off or cut right above the hem and try it through your cutter. If it makes that metallic noise, it is not a good thing to be using with your blades. Cut it with the scissors if you want and try it that way. Remember, you can put it in again and again, even in a pair of pantyhose, through the wash and the dryer, if you think that fulling it by washing it and drying it again could give it a better chance of hooking well. Some things will just disintegrate to atoms in your hands. But if you find something that has wool content, whether it's mixed with a synthetic, Angora, mohair, something else, it's probably going to work really well for rug hooking. So give it a shot and see how it goes. I've been really enjoying doing this, and I've put together quite a number of kits that are working out really well. You get all these beautiful colors. You get great texture and softness. If you're actually using your piece for a rug, you're going to be really happy with the amount of cushion that knits have. I mean, so much more than traditional wool strips. You're going to get so much cushion, and sweaters will hook a lot faster than wool strips. So that's another huge bonus. You don't want to be thinking about hooking with sweaters in the summer sitting in a beach chair. So this is the perfect time. It's fall 2020 right now. It's the perfect time to go out and try to score some sweaters from your local charity store, Goodwill Savers, whatever. Put an ad on Facebook Marketplace and say, does anybody have, in a neighborhood group, anybody have any sweaters that you discovered had holes this year? I could use them. Put them through the wash and get going with it. Remember, you can also over dye. If you find a lot of white fisherman knit type sweaters or grays, Even any lighter color, you can over dye that and make it a different color, not necessarily just a darker color, but just a brighter, different color, something that you need for your composition. But in any case, try to round up some sweaters, try to do some sensible, responsible cutting, not damaging your equipment, and then give it a try with the hooking. Just try a little bit at a time, and once you know you've got a good thing going, you can cut the whole thing to shreds, cut off the bands and the big seams, just create a bunch of little compartmentalized pieces that you can then just take off with. Pieces, 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 cut them, strip them, hook them, and see how it goes. It's really fun and different. I hope you enjoy. Write if you have any questions.